about what parents need to know about their child's IEP. We understand that, if a lot of parents, they can get really confused, really overwhelmed by all the complexities and, requirements under the IDEA. And so we're hoping that today will kind of demystify that all and just kind of help you better understand your child's IEP. Next slide. So Disability Rights Arkansas is the federally mandated protection and advocacy system and client assistance program for individuals with disabilities in Arkansas. Every state has one, and while we are federally funded, we are not part of the state or federal government. We are a private nonprofit organization. Next slide. Our mission statement is to vigorously advocate for and enforce the legal rights of people with disabilities in Arkansas. Next slide. And so we provide free advocacy and or legal services to individuals with disabilities if their issue is one that we can take. We try to at least provide all callers with information or referrals to other agencies. Next slide. So at the beginning of each fiscal year, the DRA Board of Directors adopts priorities based on feedback from individuals with disabilities, family members, advocates, professionals, or the public at large. So the priorities adopted by the board determine the activities we do, the cases we take for that fiscal year. So our priority areas are abuse, neglect, and exploitation, education and employment, youth and institutional care settings, access to services through Medicaid PASS system, voting rights and access, self-advocacy, and outreach and education. And so in order to reach those priorities, we have education objectives. Our objectives are to assist students with disabilities who are being suspended, expelled, or referred to the justice system or otherwise excluded from schools due to their disabilities. Our objective is to ensure students with disabilities will be provided with health plans and nursing services as appropriate. Enforce student rights regarding access to individualized transition services, and to assist students and individuals seeking employment with accessing assistive technology. Next slide. And so we have a couple laws that protect students with disabilities. The main focus of this webinar being the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA, Special Education Law. We also have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act that covers 504 plans. And then we also have Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of a disability. And we're not going to go too much into 504 plans today, but we did want to briefly touch on them. They are similar. They both offer educational plans at no cost to parents. They're free. They're developed by a group of people, including school administrators, teachers. They have to have parental consent, and they have multiple ways to resolve disputes in the dispute resolution process. The differences are, the type of law. So with IEPs, we have the IDEA, and then with 504 plans, we have Section 504. And then another difference are the procedural safeguards. So, we're not going to get too much into it today, but we did want to, just highlight that very quickly. So the main tenet of the IDEA is a free, appropriate public education. All students with disabilities are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. So what does that mean? It means special education and related services are provided at public expense, so at no charge to the parent. They must meet state standards, including IDEA requirements, include appropriate preschool, elementary school, or secondary school education, and are provided in accordance with a properly developed IEP.
Okay, so now we're going to get into IDEA overview, and we've got a poll that we're wanting to throw up here just to kind of get a gauge of the audience, just to see who's here and what we're looking at. So, Lainey. So basically, just describe your current status. Do you have a child with an IEP? You have a child with a 504? I think my child might need services, or I don't know. All right. Just give one more second. All right, Lainey, you want to show the results? Okay. So it looks like a lot of you here are people with kids on an IEP currently. So that'll be good just to kind of get an idea of what we're looking at as well. And then I would think maybe some of the I don't knows are also people who work in different organizations as well, because I've seen quite a few of you on the participant list as well. So my name is Jen Goodwin. I'm here with Kyla today, and we're just going to get into kind of the IDEA overview, and let's get started. And also, if you guys have questions, feel free to throw them in anytime. We can jump in and ask questions. Won't be able to get into too many specific details, but we're happy to talk about those if you need to at a different time too. So, all right, so the IDEA overview, birth to 21 years. So it's good for students all the way until they're 21. Schools have responsibilities for that. So there are 1 of 13 specific disabilities listed in the law. So we're going to get into that in a later slide too, going through what the specific ones are. It's a written document. So whenever you have the IEP, it's actually going to be all written out. It's going to have all kinds of information in it. It's usually a pretty long document if most of you have seen them, I'm sure, at this point. So, and it has a requirement for who the IEP team members need to be. So it tells you that you need to have a parent involved, a student if they are available and it's appropriate, general ed teacher, a special ed teacher, the LEA for the school, administrators, that sort of thing. So just giving you the list of everybody that needs to be there. You can have an independent education evaluation. So if you don't necessarily agree with the evaluations that have been done at the school, you can actually have those done independently as well, one time at the cost of the school, not for you. So requirements for the IEP, so there's got to be a present level of performance, so where they are now, and then goals need to be listed out there and measurable. So we need to have the services, any modifications, and the least restrictive environment that's going to be appropriate for the student. The procedural safeguards that'll be involved. Lainey? Okay, so looking back at the FAPE again, so the free appropriate public education under the IDEA. So it must be available to all resident children that are ages 3 to 21, including students who have been suspended or expelled from school. So sometimes people think, oh, well, my child's been expelled, and so they don't get the services anymore, but that's absolutely untrue. The school still has an obligation to provide services even for a child who has been expelled if they're on an IEP. So the obligation to begin providing services starts at age 3. So a lot of people that are younger and don't even know that they have services available, they're out there. So it must be made available to eligible students, even if they're not failing or retained and advancing from grade to grade. So a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, well, my child doesn't qualify for special education because their grades are fine, or, you know, whatever the situation is. And so often that's a misconception too, because perhaps they have behaviors that are excluding them from school, but they still have the IQ that allows them to pass the grades, but other things are causing them to need accommodations within the school. And so they might still be appropriate for an IEP at that point. So, and they must be tailored and individualized to meet the unique needs of the child. So many times I've seen IEPs that literally are a copy and paste situation where a former student's name is still in the document. Honestly, these need to come clean to the meeting. So clean pages that have no information on them before, because they really literally need to be written specifically for that child at the table that we're discussing at that point. So just keep that in mind, and that it really needs to be tailored specifically to your child, not just another child like your child, as they kind of think sometimes. And I mean, oftentimes the services are similar with similar disabilities, but every single child is different. Every child needs different things, so they need to be individualized completely. So, all right. So special education services are just defined as specially designed instruction provided at no cost to the parent to meet the unique child needs of the child with a disability. It includes related services such as your speech therapy, occupational therapies, physical therapies, mental health therapies, whatever it needs to be. It includes travel, training, vocational education. That's what they're going to do after school too, so starting to think about that. It ensures your child's access to the general curriculum so the child can meet jurisdiction's education standards. So it's not a watered down education. And it can be provided in the classroom, at home, in the hospital, an institution, or other settings. So wherever the child needs to be at the time, the education needs to be provided. And this is just important to remember that special education is a service, it's not a place. Because so many people think, oh, well, it's the special education room. And that's not the case. It really is a service that can go wherever your child is. Child fine. So this is something that you may have heard of, maybe not. But with child fine, basically it is saying that the school has an affirmative, ongoing obligation to identify, locate, and evaluate all children with disabilities residing within the jurisdiction who are in need of special education and related services. So it's actually the obligations on the school district to find these students and identify all of the IDEA eligible students who reside in their jurisdiction. So regardless of the severity of their disability, so even if we have students who are highly mobile or migrant children, they still have a responsibility there. Kids who are homeless or wards of the state, who are attending private schools, and who are any kid who's suspected of being a child with a disability. So even if they don't have a specific diagnosis at that point, the school has an obligation to seek out these children to make sure that they are going to get the services that they need to be able to be successful in school. So while a parent is allowed to request services and testing for a student, they're not required to request that the district identify and evaluate a child. So, but the school must obtain informed consent before they can conduct the evaluation. So even if the school sees, oh, it looks like this child needs some evaluations, they've got to go to the parents and get permission for that first. So it is a group effort. Everybody in the team is involved with that. So just keep that in mind. School district can't take a passive approach and just wait for others to refer the student for special education services. The district must seek out IDEA eligible children. Sometimes that gets a little sticky because parents sometimes think, oh, my child is just fine and they're progressing just as the general population. And a lot of times parents don't know because they don't see the other students, so they don't see the differences in their child versus some of the other children. And maybe it's their first child and they don't know where they should be on the scales. And So sometimes it's easier for the school to see what's going on with these kids too. So red flags to look for. So as a parent, you may see some of these things in your kid and just try to think, okay, well, maybe this is something I should look at. So difficulty understanding instructions, refusing to follow directions, consistent disruptive behaviors, difficulty with reading, writing, and or math, short attention spans, restlessness or impulsivity, self-injurious behaviors, withdrawing from peers, and repeated suspensions or expulsions. There's a few more. So attendance problems, significantly behind academically, being retained, consistent non-proficiency on statewide assessments, a mental health diagnosis, ADHD or ADD, or an alternative learning environment placement. So these are things that the school should look for or the parent should look for, either one. All right, so now we're getting into the 13 categories that we discussed earlier. So basically, if your child is eligible for an IEP, they're going to be placed into one of these categories. And so the list here will tell you, and sometimes it's a question trying to sort out, well, which one does the child fall under specifically? And usually they are going to look for the most disabling condition for the school day. So what is going to cause them to really need the most services? And there's a couple of catch-alls here as well, but we'll go through the list. Number 1 is an intellectual disability. 2 is a hearing impairment. 3 is speech or language impairment. 4 is a visual impairment. 5, serious emotional disturbance. 6, deafness. 7, an orthopedic impairment. 8, autism. 9, traumatic brain injury. 10, other health impairment. So that could be kind of your catch-all category. 11, a specific learning disability. So if they have one area that they really struggle in. 12 is deaf blindness. And 13 is multiple disabilities. So these kids qualify if they need special education and related services as a result of their disability. So just because the child has a disability or diagnosis or a DSM-5 diagnosis, it does not necessarily mean that they're eligible for special education services. They also need to be required to have a need for special education services. So a need for specialized education, basically. All right, Kyla.
Okay, so how do we get this process started? How do I get my child an IEP? We're going to talk about the referral process. So you or someone with knowledge of the child's disability or suspected disability, like a teacher or a doctor, can request a referral. The referral should be in writing, just as a general best practice. Most communications should be kept in writing, just so that we can have something to reference back to. But once you submit your request for an IEP, it starts the timeline. And so this is important because it puts the school on notice and triggers the procedural safeguards. So they only have, so much time to complete the evaluation process, and they have to have parental consent. So within 7 days of receiving the request, the SPED director school district will need to contact the parent to schedule a referral conference. So basically where they will, a meeting to discuss, why are you referring your child for special education services, and gather consent. And then after that, that's when the testing begins. That's when they have to complete their evaluations. And they have 60 days to complete these. And as I said before, parental consent is required, so the parent has to give permission. And then After the evaluations are completed within 30 days, they have to have the evaluation programming conference. And this is where they will review the data from the evaluations and decide whether the child meets special education criteria. Initial evaluation. So as I said, parental consent is required, and they do have 60 days to complete these evaluations. So they have, so in addition to conducting new evaluations, they have to review existing data, data or evaluations that the parent provides. And they have to evaluate for cognitive, behavioral, physical, and developmental factors. And they should be assessed in all areas of suspected disability to determine the child's present level of performance, what they can do. So some of those assessments will include, a health screening, a vision screening, a hearing screening, an assessment for social and emotional status, IQ, academic performance, communicative status, and motor abilities. And then if a child is determined eligible for special education, a reevaluation is required once every 3 years, unless agreed to otherwise as the parent, or unless agreed to otherwise by the district and the parent. So what goes in the IEP? Or what does the IEP team consider? So in drafting the IEP, the team needs to consider the child's strengths, the needs of the child, any concerns the parent might have, if they feel they are a little behind somewhere, they could use more work in a certain area. They also must consider positive behavioral interventions and supports to address behavior. So, sometimes children exhibit behavior related to their disabilities that, may cause disruption in the classroom. And if that is happening, that needs to be addressed in the IEP. They must consider the communication needs of a child. So, does the child need assistive technology to communicate? They must consider the language needs of a child. So, if we have a student who is limited English proficiency, they should look at whether, some work should be translated. And they also must consider Braille instruction for a child who is visually impaired. And so in the IEP, they'll include the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So, what can the child do? What can he or she not do? And then they also have to include measurable annual goals. So that's usually seen in the back of the IEP, usually written something like, Joey will complete or will count to more than 30, 50% of the time, things like that. A statement of special education related services and supplementary aids or modifications. The explanation of the extent to which the child will not participate with non-disabled children in general education. That is concerning a child's placement, which we will get into shortly. The IEP must include any accommodations on state and district assessments. I know we have some testing going on this week, so any accommodations for those should be in the IEP. And the IEP must also list out the frequency, location, and duration of services. So how often they'll receive, occupational therapy, where they'll receive it. That has to be specified in the IEP.
Hey, Kyla, we have a question. What if it is recommended for a student to receive ABA services, but the school does not offer that service? Is the school responsible for that service, or will the child not have access to that service from the school?
If a child, so if we have a child that's being recommended for ABA, that I don't know, Jen, do you?
ABA services are really difficult. Like, I feel like that's a question that we get often. And so I've seen it implemented in some IEPs, but it is really, really difficult to get through the school. A lot of times it's coming through the PASS program
Yes.
for students, and so it's getting paid for through that. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of BCBAs available in our state, and that's a board certified behavioral analyst, to be able to provide those services as well. So Arkansas is really lacking in a lot of those services to be available. Some of the schools do offer ABA therapy through the school, but it's something that you can certainly request. And I would argue that if it's a need, then it's something that should really, really be considered as well. It's been something we've been looking at in a lot of our cases lately.
If the school says no, or I would look at to see if the Medicaid or the PASS can pay for it first, because it is so rare that we see it offered.
But if the student is being excluded from school, so suspended or expelled due to behaviors, and this is what it's going to take to be able to help them get the education that they need, then I would say it could be argued for a service that would be necessary.
Yes, yeah, and to be clear, a school district can't kick a child out and then say in order to come back, he has to be participating in ABA therapy. That's not something they can do. They'll have to work with the parent on that.
Mm-hmm.
We also have another question. Should the parent of a student schedule an audio or visual screening once a year?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a good idea. Yeah, that would be good. They can request that from the school.
And a lot of times that's done in the school annually anyway, just across the board for
Yeah.
all students as well. So just kind of as a standard check that they do. But I know a lot of times they'll give you information that maybe you need to follow up with a doctor after, just the simple checks that they do at the school
Right.
as well.
Okay, good questions, guys. Keep them coming. So just very briefly, I know most of us here are parents and not lawyers, but we did want to talk about the Andrew F. decision, which is a Supreme Court case where they explicitly rejected a de minimis standard of faith. So, what does that mean? That means that goals must be appropriately ambitious and reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So we want the IEP, we want the goals to be ambitious. We're not just looking at, advancement or just passing them through grade to grade. We want them to be, ambitious just as it is for, the regular education class.
Kyla, we have another question, and this might be something y'all want to hold till later. I'll go ahead and read it, but I'll just let y'all determine when you want to address this. My child has an IEP, but it was not tailored to meet the needs of my child, even though I explained the extent to which I wanted my child not to participate with non-disabled children due to bullying. What do I need to do, or with whom do I need to address this?
So if a child with a disability is being bullied to the point they are being excluded from school or cannot go to school, then the IEP team must address that in the IEP. We will touch on this later on, but children with disabilities are required to be educated with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. And so removing a child from the regular education classroom is considered a more restrictive move. I would ask, what has the IEP team done to address the bullying and the impact of the bullying on the student's ability to go to school. We see it all the time. Children with, maybe depression, anxiety, ADHD are bullied to the point where they will refuse to go to school, or, not go to school or just not do their work. And so if that is having an impact on the child's ability to receive FAPE, the IEP team must address it. They must address the bullying. Okay, great. Continued required team members. The IEP team has to consist of the child's teacher, the child's parent, a special education teacher, and other an LEA, and then other individuals with relevant knowledge of the child. And then IEP must be in effect at the start of each school year. And so if a student transfers into a district, the district must adopt a comparable IEP until they either adopt the previous one from the previous district or they decide to develop a new one. I just wanted to pause since I know we're kind of pivoting, but did anyone have any other questions about what we just reviewed before we get into extended school year?
It looks like the question back to ABA, she just kind of added an additional comment. The challenge with ABA is it's a service that is required in bulk time, meaning 10 plus hours a week. So outpatient would not be an option just due to the child being present at school, parent trying to navigate attaining proper services for a child with autism. So more of I think a follow-up to the ABA question.
And I've seen it done both ways. I've seen some of it get implemented into school, and then I've also seen it done after school. So I know it makes for a really, really long day for those students whenever they do have to go after school, and the slots are really limited as well. But it is definitely a tough situation, but it can be done either way. So, Kyla, have you seen that?
I have seen it like a kind of a hybrid model, and then also where they receive ABA therapy after school. I would ask if the district is resistant to the ABA folks coming in, because we see that sometimes. That would be what I would ask. Because if the IEP team is fine with it, I don't see any reason why the ABA therapist shouldn't come in and provide that there, right, Jen?
Yeah, and a lot of times the schedule can be modified as well, so that way they're still able to get all of their academics in just in a different way. You don't want it to be that you're checking out early from school to go to ABA therapy every day and you're missing math and science at the end of the day or whatever. So it needs to be something done in conjunction with the IEP team so that all of the things can still get accomplished and all the academics can still be covered as well. So, all right. Now looking at extended school year. So a lot of people think that this is just summer school, and it's not at all. So special education related services are provided to a student with a disability beyond the normal school year. So it's in accordance with the IEP and it's at no cost to parents. So basically you see this as a check mark on the IEP list of, does this child require extended school year ESY services, is what it'll say on there. And it's basically a checkbox, yes or no. And so what it is offering is it's for students who will lose information that they've already gained if they go for a period of time without continuing to learn and move forward. So if it's going to be that they're going to have to go back and reteach everything that they learned in the last school year because they're going to forget everything over the summer, then that would be a student that would be eligible for ESY services. So that way they're not going to have to go back and relearn everything that they've already learned just to keep that knowledge. Transition services. This one's kind of a big thing in my world because I work a lot with people that are trying to get back to work after having a disability as well. So, and I just think that this is really important. So many times we ask our kids, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we listen to them, and we hear whether they want to be a fireman or a cop or the president or a paleontologist if you're my son when he was 2, whatever. So it's just interesting to hear what they have to say. But I think that so often we forget that kids with disabilities have those same goals and dreams too. And we've got to make sure that we're asking those kids those same questions. We got to know, okay, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do whenever you're done with school? And then as a team, we need to come together and come up with a plan to make that happen for them and to let them be the lead in that. So this is a meeting that I would say that the child absolutely needs to be a part of. They need to be the key players sitting at the table for these meetings. They need to not begin any later than when they're 16. I would advocate for earlier than that, more like 14. And if a child has a more severe disability where you know that they're going to require more services, then the earlier the better. So at that point, you're going to be looking at appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based upon their age, appropriate transition assessments related to training, education, employment, and independent living skills if appropriate, and transition services, including courses of study needed to assist the child to reach the goals. So if you've got someone who says, well, I want to live independently, I want to live in an apartment, I want to work at, let's say, Walmart, whatever they want to do, then you need to start looking at teaching them the skills to be able to live independently. So if that's going to be, learning how to ride a cab or a bus or whatever to get to school, or it might be teaching them to learn to drive, whatever, so they can be independent with that, or doing laundry, paying bills, that sort of stuff. All of those things can be added in to services that they can get within the school day so that they can start to learn those processes to be successful. A lot of times it includes like internships or externships, or a lot of schools have programs where they're allowed to actually work at the school. Some of them even have programs where they can work at the school for money. So it's teaching them how to manage their money and how to have the responsibilities of a job and the responsibilities of answering to an employer, all of those sorts of things. But they really need, I just want to stress, the student needs to be at the head of this program because they need to be the ones saying, this is really my goals and dreams are. And everybody at the table has to be realistic with that and try to figure out, what version that looks like and help them to get to the best goals that they can get. So it should be a coordinated set of activities for the student. It's based on their individual needs and includes the student's strengths, preferences, and interest. Instruction, related services, community experiences, development of post-school goals, acquisition of daily living skills, and provision of functional vocational evaluation. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about a child's special education placement and or least restrictive environment under the IDEA. So kind of going back to what I was talking about before, children with disabilities must be educated with their non-disabled classmates to the maximum extent appropriate. And so the core concept behind this is inclusion, integration, mainstreaming. So, before the IDEA, we saw, children with disabilities being pushed into special schools, separate schools away from non-disabled peers. And so that's the principle behind that. And so, special classes or separate schooling or the removal of a child with disabilities from the regular classroom setting should occur only if the nature and the severity of the disability is such that they cannot be educated in the regular classroom, even with aids and support. And so they must consider a full range of supplementary aids and modifications that would keep the child in the regular education classroom.
Kyla, I've got a person here. Is the person that asked the question earlier about her child being bullied. And piggybacking on that question about non-disabled participation, I did request that my child be moved to another class away from the students that were actually bullying her. However, I do advocate for my child to participate with all children, disabled and non-disabled. My concern is how it affected her and a very negative impact on her school experience due to particular students that were allowed to bully her because she remained in the same class. Now she needs therapy and or counseling.
Okay. So I would ask, has the IEP team met and considered the issue of bullying? Just because I'm not sure what school district this is, so I'm not sure what other placements are offered, and we'll get into alternative placements here shortly, but I would bring it up with the IEP team, and if they are not considering it or taking it seriously, that you may want to engage in some dispute resolution, which we'll get into later. Okay. So to determine educational placement, the district must ensure that the placement decision is made by a group of persons knowledgeable about the child, the evaluation data, and placement options. So, what does the school have available besides the regular education classroom? The placement decision must conform to the least restrictive environment provisions within the IDEA, and placement decisions occur annually, are based on the child's IEP, and are as close as possible to the child's home unless otherwise agreed upon. And it excludes extracurricular activities. So other considerations, the child must attend the school he or she would attend if not disabled unless otherwise agreed on. The team must also consider any potential harmful effects on the child or the quality of services he or she needs, in that placement. And a child with a disability can't be removed from an age-appropriate regular education classroom setting solely due to needed modifications in the general education curriculum. So, if they can succeed in the regular education classroom with the appropriate modifications, support strategies in place, then they should be. So it's helpful to kind of think of this as a continuum. And so we have the regular classroom instruction, which is considered the least restrictive. And so as you work away from that, it becomes more and more restrictive. So special classes are considered more restrictive. So that's resource or self-contained. Special schools are considered even more restrictive, so day treatment, things like that. Home instruction or homebound is considered very, very restrictive. So that's, when the child is receiving instruction, in the home for a minimum of, I think it's 4 hours a week. And then most restrictive we have is instruction in hospitals and institutions. So that would be for children who are very, very sick. And so now we are going to talk about discipline. We see this a lot where, a child whose that behavior is related to a disability, that behavior can be disruptive in the classroom or, harmful to the child or others. So first thing, a school may remove a child with a disability if the child violates a code of student conduct. Types of removals are, out of school suspension, in school suspension, sending them home informally. So, you're called to the school, hey, your child's, causing a mess, come get them and take them home for the day. And placements into alternative learning environments. And we'll get it more into that later. But the most important thing is that, even if a child is removed, they are still entitled to FAPE, so they still need to receive those services. What are some protections for students with disabilities? So the ability of a school to suspend and expel is limited. So if they're removed for more than, or if they're removed in an excess of 10 days, so 10 days or more, the team has to hold a manifestation determination review. And so this meeting, this manifestation determination review, must take place within 10 days of the alleged conduct. And so at this meeting, at the manifestation determination review, they will decide whether the child's behavior was a manifestation of their disability, and then they will also determine the child's placement. So a little bit more on manifestation determination reviews. So this is a meeting where the district and the parent and members of the IEP team review all relevant information in the child's file. So, discipline referrals, behavior observations, any evaluations. They have to review all that information in order to decide whether the conduct is a manifestation of the child's disability. So, was this behavior caused by the child's disability? And so they have to consider, if the conduct was caused by or had a direct and substantial relationship to the child's disability, or they have to consider if the conduct was the direct result of the school's failure to implement the IEP. So what does that mean? If the child's IEP has a behavior intervention plan and they did not follow that, that would be one example of them not following or failing to implement the IEP. So if it is determined that the behavior was a manifestation of the child's disability, then the IEP team must conduct a functional behavior assessment and implement a behavior intervention plan. So, okay, I'll continue this and then elaborate. So the IEP team must conduct a functional behavior assessment and implement a behavior plan, or review and amend the existing behavior plan to address the behavior and return the child to his prior placement. So what is a functional behavior assessment? So a functional behavior assessment is it's a data gathering process used to identify problem behaviors and develop interventions to improve or eliminate to address those behaviors. So this could be a lot of the times they'll gather data by direct observation, somebody just watching the child in his placement, his classroom, to determine what is the function of this behavior? Why are they acting this way? Are they trying to get out of doing a worksheet? Are they triggered? Are they, is it a sensory issue? That's the purpose of a functional behavior assessment, to determine the why. And so once that's done, the data gathered in the functional behavior assessment will be used to create and implement a behavior intervention plan. And basically a behavior intervention plan is, it's a plan to, a formal written plan that, teaches and rewards good behavior. The purpose is to, stop the behavior that is, causing them to be removed. It can be, a behavior plan can be one page, many pages. The most important things that it needs to include is to say what the problem behavior is and say it specifically. Describe why it's happening. So why is the child eloping from the classroom? What's going on that is making the child want to escape? And then strategies or supports to help address that behavior. So all the information gathered during the functional behavior assessment is going to be used to form this behavior intervention plan. And then after that, it's up to the district to implement and monitor that plan for its effectiveness. And so if it's decided that the child's act of conduct wasn't a manifestation, so it wasn't related to the child's disability, if they decide that, then a parent can appeal that decision by requesting a process hearing.
I have a question. Do you provide parents an advocate for an initial IEP meeting?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Excuse me. Do you provide parents an advocate for an initial IEP meeting?
Oh, you would need to call in our intake line to see if we could take that. Right, Jen?
Yeah, I think it just depends on what the situation is. I know that's a lawyer answer on it depends. So if we can't take it, a lot of times we can refer it out to some other places that have advocates that can help with those initial meetings. If it's a situation, so our current priorities, they change every year, as we mentioned earlier, but our current priorities right now is kids that are being suspended or expelled from school. So if it's a situation where they are not receiving school right now, so they're being excluded from school, sometimes that can be included in initial IEP. So if they're not getting the services, something like that, then typically, yes, it's something that we can take, but it just depends on the situation. So I would do the same thing that Kyla just said, call Christy in our intake line and she can help determine that. But if we can't take it, then we can usually refer to someone who can help with that.
Which I dropped the link to the how to get help page on our website into the chat.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Okay, so interim alternative educational settings. So this comes in only in specific circumstances. So a child can be removed from school without regard to whether the conduct was a manifestation of their disability. So they can't be removed if they do any of the following: carry or possess a weapon on campus, knowingly possess or use illegal drugs, or sell or solicit the sale of a controlled substance, or if the child has inflicted serious bodily injury on another. So if any of those three things happen, a school district is allowed to remove the child from school without regard to whether it was caused by his or her disability. This removal, however, can only last 45 days, and the child still has to receive services during this time. The IEP team will determine the interim setting. So if the parent and the school disagree on the interim placement decision, the parent can appeal that by requesting a hearing. So this is just important to remember if, any of these three specific circumstances come into play. But, most importantly, the child is still entitled to receive services during this time. Alternative learning environments. So we see this a lot in our cases. Oftentimes, the option of a student attending an ALE is presented to the parents as, a positive thing, a good thing. It's presented as a structured environment with a smaller class size that can, better meet a child's needs than, regular classroom instruction. The problem we run into is that students are often sent to ALE without ever being identified or provided or evaluated for, special education and related services. This is an issue because there are state requirements for ALE placements, and some of those placement requirements are social and emotional, maybe deficits, what we call. And so, what we see a lot is, the child is struggling enough to be, removed completely from their class and placed in an ALE, but, not so much to the point where the district thinks that they need a special education referral. And so, just if I would say, if your child is, being considered for, an alternative learning environment, I would just discuss with the district, why they feel that specific environment would be more helpful. And if any of the strategies or modifications that are implemented in ALEs, can any of those be implemented in the classroom? What can we do to keep this child in their least restrictive environment?
All right, so now we're going to go looking at procedural safeguards under the IDEA. So you have to have prior written notice. So when meetings are coming, you need to be notified in writing that it's coming up. You've got to give consent. So that is for assessments, that sort of thing. You have to be able to participate in the meetings. So nothing without us, or nothing about us without us kind of mentality there. So you need to be able to be at the meeting, have an option or an opportunity for your voice to be heard. You need to have an opportunity to examine the records. It's not fair when everybody else at the table can see what's going on and you're just left in the dark, not having any of that information. So anytime you request your child's records, you should be able to get those. And you need to be able to have an independent educational evaluation at the public expense. So we touched on that earlier. Just if you get an evaluation that you don't agree with that was done within the school, you can request to have an outside evaluation done and have that done free of charge one time. Dispute resolution under IDEA. So administrative exhaustion requirements. So basically you can't just jump straight to state or federal court. You've got to actually go through the process that is already set up through the IDEA. You can do mediation, so that way you're going to have kind of a neutral person who's going to sit at the table and is going to listen to both sides and then help to determine what would be most appropriate, just to allow people to come to a conclusion. And there are different services that are offered for that. The Bowen Law School actually has a mediation clinic where some students can go and participate that way. Seen that be successful at times. Another option is a state complaint. These can actually be filed by anyone. So if you see something going on in the school that is inappropriate, it can be filed by anyone. So it's going to be alleging a violation of any requirement of the IDEA. It's got a 1-year statute of limitations, so it needs to be something that is being addressed within the last year of the occurrence. It's got a 60-day time frame. So once you submit your state complaint, the state, so the Arkansas Department of Education, has 60 days to review it. They're going to go in, they're going to ask questions of you, they're going to ask questions of the school, they're going to kind of do a report and determine what's going on and what needs to be done about it. They've got 60 days to get back with all of that information. Then the next option is a due process. So this is what you hear sometimes when people say that they're suing the school. It's going to be a due process complaint. So it can be filed by a parent or a public agency on behalf of the student. So it's alleging a violation related to identification, evaluation, or educational placement of a child with a disability, or the provision of FAPE to the child. This one has a 2-year statute of limitations, so you'll notice that it's double the amount of time of the state complaint. So things that have happened within the last 2 years can come up in a due process claim. So it gives you the opportunity to resolve complaints prior to an impartial due process hearing. And also can input, it's called a stay put provision. So unless otherwise agreed upon, the child can stay in their current placement pending the outcome of an administrative or judicial proceeding. So that way, if a student is going to be expelled from the school or sent to an ALE or sent, somewhere else, it allows the child to stay right where they are that whole time. So I kind of want to just walk through what the due process looks like a little bit too. So it's going to be where you'll actually write up a whole document of what has gone wrong. And so you'll list all of the things that have happened with your student and just an itemized list. That's why I recommend anytime I'm talking to a parent, get a notebook from the very beginning. If your child has an IEP, you need to have a 3-ring binder at your house that has, their information in it. And then just keep a log. So anytime something happens, go ahead and throw it in there because you need date times and stamps and that sort of stuff. Keep up with emails, all of that, so you'll have it as proof for your due process as you go. They're just going to list all the things that you feel like haven't happened correctly for your child to receive the services that they need. And then you're also going to list a list of what can help resolve that. And so it's just kind of giving your ideas of these are the things that I think would make it better. And then usually before you have to go to an actual hearing, which is more like a court setting, you can have a resolution meeting. So it's going to be you and the school, and you're going to sit down and discuss it. So kind of like mediation, but it doesn't necessarily have a mediator involved. But that way you will have an opportunity to discuss it and see if you can come to terms before you have to go through with the whole actual hearing proceedings. So, okay. This is just going into stay put just a little bit more. So if the school doesn't want to implement the stay put, it just says that they have the burden to require, and so it's on them to show why the stay put shouldn't be in place in this specific time frame. Okay.
And just very quickly, surrogate parents. So school districts still have to ensure a child's rights are protected, even when a parent can't be identified, located, if the child is a ward of the state or is an unaccompanied homeless youth. The state educational agency must make efforts to assign them surrogate parent within 30 days. So just something to remember. Okay, so that's that's everything that we had prepared to present. Wanted to see if you guys had any questions, and Lainey,
If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or into the chat. Either way, we've had them both going pretty strong throughout the session. We'll take another minute or two, kind of wait.
While those questions are coming in, I wanted to touch again very briefly on the child's IEP team. Felt like I kind of went over that too quickly. So just to reiterate, the child's IEP team has to include, the child's parent, a special education teacher, a regular education teacher, a rep from the school, a rep from other agencies that are providing services, transition services. So Arkansas Rehabilitation Services might be one, and the student as appropriate. we don't see that a lot, obviously, with, elementary age school kids. But, once they get into middle school and high school, that's when they're going to start, becoming more involved, or to be deciding, their transition services. So just wanted to clarify that really quickly, because sometimes, we see older students not really invited to their IEP meetings, and they should be. They should be.
We've got a question here. If a child was denied an IEP due to good grades, the child has autism, what is the first step the parent should take?
First, we would need to look at is the child, struggling in the classroom, with behaviors or sensory needs, because an IEP, okay, I lost my train of thought with that one. Jen, you take over.
No, I was just going to say, have evaluations been done, that sort of thing, to see if there are other reasons that they might need special education services as well. So we do hear this a lot, that the child has good grades and so they don't need it. But if they're being suspended, or if you're getting calls because they're getting sent home because, whatever happened, okay. And I'm seeing a follow-up on that. The child is sent home almost weekly for behavioral issues. So that is where the need for some services could come in. And so that needs to be addressed at an IEP meeting. You can call a meeting at any point. So if you have concerns like that, then you just call up the school and say, hey, I want to have another meeting. I want my child evaluated for this. That might be a good opportunity for them to look at doing an FBA, so that functional behavioral assessment, to go in and see if they can figure out what the function of that behavior is. So what's triggering that, and then come up with a behavioral intervention plan. Sometimes kids with sensory issues, or sometimes kids with autism, have sensory issues. So it might be something as simple as they need a cool down area. They need, a darker space. They need fidget spinners, whatever it is. And so that can be addressed through a behavioral intervention plan as well. But I would say that that is certainly a situation where you could certainly request another meeting to talk about it and bring up those behavioral concerns for sure.
And if you don't want to, go that route, you could, as we discussed, file a state complaint. There's a form on the Arkansas Department of Education actually has a fillable form on their website for state complaints. So it makes it more, more accessible for parents. But that would be another option. But like we said, yes, if this child's disability related behaviors are, such that they're being removed from the classroom, obviously that, affects their ability to receive their education. And so that would need to be addressed by the school.
We have another question. How can you deal with individual teachers who push back on some of the things included in the IEP? At times, this creates a stressful environment for my child, and he continues to ask for a different teacher. The teacher can be short-tempered and stuff like that.
I know what I'm going to say. I would say file a state complaint. It sounds like maybe the teacher is not following, modifications or accommodations in the IEP. Tough. Sorry, teacher, but you need to follow the IEP. If the child is not receiving, what they should be, the accommodations and modifications that are listed out on their IEP, like extended time or breaking down instructions, that would be I would think, pretty easy state complaint to file. What do you think, Jen?
I agree with that. Or just having a meeting. I mean, I always try to handle it at the lowest possible level. So have a conversation with the teacher if that door is something that's open. Sometimes you need to. I'm a huge advocate for calling another meeting, sitting at the table and everybody discussing it and making sure that everyone's clear on what is listed in the IEP. Just remember that IEP is basically the law for that student. So they are required to follow the things that are listed in that IEP. So, and the other thing that I always say is it's very fluid as well. So if there are things in there that aren't working for your student, then get everybody at the table and find something that will work and come up with something different that will be more appropriate for that child until they are able to get their education. I'd be happy doing it.
I'm not sure if this is a question or they can implement a BSP without having an IEP.
What? Could you repeat that?
I'm not sure if this was intended to be a question or a statement. They can implement a BSP without having an IEP. Maria, you have to provide some more information.
And also, is BSP, are you considering that a behavioral support plan? Is that what we're talking about here? Okay. So yes, that is a behavioral support plan. So, okay.
So we have another question regarding the transition services part for the student's IEP. Would there be opportunities to start job trainings at local businesses, even if they're still in high school or already graduated from high school?
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually a great idea for students. A lot of times the school can be involved in that, and they can help work with some local businesses to provide that. And a lot of schools do like a school to work program where students are able to go, whether it's the last block of the day or whatever, to a work site to be able to start learning those job skills. Arkansas Rehab Services can also be involved in that. This is something within the last few years that 15% of their annual budget has to go towards transition services. So helping youth in that age range to find jobs and figure out what's next for them. So the earlier that they are getting those job skills, the more likely that they will be successful in vocational goals in the future. So absolutely, I think it's a great idea.
Again, if you have any other questions, drop those in the Q&A or in the chat. We'll have a few more minutes for Q&A available. While we're waiting on any questions, I do want to ask, we'll have a short survey at the end of this webinar. It will also go out in an email. We would ask if you would just complete that for us. It lets us know how we're doing, if there's any other information you would like to hear about from DRA. So if you would please complete that at the end of this webinar. It's a really short, I think it's an 8-question survey. So that would really help us out if you would complete that. We will have another webinar coming up in July. I'll drop a link in the chat right now where you'll find previous recordings and also any upcoming where you'll be able to register for those. So I've dropped a link for that for you. If we have no other questions, Jen, Kyla, do you have anything else for us? Oh, we just got one. Hang on. Let's see. How do we reach out to a school about their special needs program? How soon can we reach out and what is appropriate?
I would say today. So
it sounds like this asker may have a child in preschool, and I'm just guessing, but if it is, just contact the school district's special education director or office. Usually you can find that online by Googling it, and start that conversation. Over email, just reach out to be like, hi, my name is so and so. I have a child that will be enrolling in your district. I'd like to discuss special education services. And so, yeah, like Jen said, today, just as soon as possible, the earlier the better.
And it does look like, yes, the child is in preschool.
Yeah, so I would go ahead and start reaching out.
All right, any other questions? We've had an IEP for 3 years now. What if my child isn't improving?
How, go ahead, Jen.
Well, I was just going to say that could mean a whole bunch of different things in my world. So I don't know if that means academically, behaviorally, all of those things. So it's hard to know in this kind of setting specifically. But again, those IEPs are fluid. And if it's not working for you, then that would be a time to really have another meeting to discuss, okay, this isn't working. If they're not meeting the goals in their IEP, then you need to start looking at what other services need to be offered, if they need, okay, so reading levels are the same overall. I've had to find an outside tutor. So, I mean, those are things that you might need more reading intervention that's added in there within the school day. Sometimes they can pay for an extra person that's going to be working more one-on-one time with the student, those sorts of things. So that's what I would be looking at, is just what other services can be offered within the school to help get them where they need to be.
Lainey, did I hear right that they said that their child has had an IEP for 3 years?
Correct, 3 years.
Okay. Well, your child may be due for reevaluation then, that we had talked about earlier. So that reevaluation that's required every 3 years. If your child's still not making improvement, maybe they need to update the IEP, or see where his skills are right now. But reach out to the district about conducting a 3-year reevaluation.
Yep.
These are great questions. Do we have any more out there?
I just want to direct everybody's attention to that last slide. So that's how you reach us. So that number at the bottom is if you do need to call us about specific things that are going on with your child and think you might need a referral to us, then use that number to call in. You'll speak to our intake person and she'll get you in the right direction.
All right, Jen, Kyla, any final words?
Thank you guys
Hang in
so
there,
much
parents.
for joining us. Yeah, hang in there, parents.
All right, well,
Sometimes it gets to be a rough ride, but you're the best advocate for your kids. So it's worth the fight for sure, to make sure that they get the services that they need and to know that you're in their corner. So thank you guys so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen and Kyla. Thanks for the great presentation, all the great answers to the questions. Thank you all for attending. We hope you've learned and enjoyed the presentation. Again, we do ask that you complete the short survey for us. Look for our next webinar coming up. And then also, as we mentioned before, this presentation was recorded. We will share out this presentation as well as some resources as well. It'll be a couple weeks, but we'll get those sent out to you to have on hand. Thank you again and have a lovely rest of your week.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Bye.